Well, today is a really special episode, and I am really excited to go deep about one family of flowers. Welcome, Liz, to the Flower Podcast.
Hey, thanks for inviting me, Scott. Love being here. Love talking to you.
Well, I really appreciate. I know this is a crazy time for you, waiting for these amazing garden jewels to start exploding with color. And I'm kind of glad they're a little behind schedule this year because now we have the chance to do this interview.
I know. Yeah, they really are. Like I said to you, it's been like 46 degrees almost every morning for the past 2 weeks. And that's just, they're waiting to bloom. They're just sitting there. A lot of them are in bud stage. And my nephew was just out there this morning and I asked him what the field looked like. And he said, well, we're getting some more. They're slowly coming, but we might have bloom till June 15th this year, which is, that's really late. But
Wow, that's
yeah, it's
amazing.
late. It's late. Everyone's garden's late this year. But in some ways, if you're a gardener, you kind of love it in some ways if you don't mind putting on an extra vest and an extra coat because the blooms. I hate years where all of a sudden everything blooms at once and then it's over. And
Yes.
and this is really nice because it's cold, but the dogwoods are gorgeous. The rhododendrons are coming out, and some of the King George loderi rhodies are gorgeous around here. We have so many. The dwarfs, the dwarf iris we have, Iris germanica, they are beautiful, and so we get to see them a little bit longer and enjoy them a little bit longer, even though it's so bloody cold outside. And don't forget we had record rain in April, so and
Oh,
yesterday we probably had an inch and a half rain. It was crazy. Yeah, it's just we've just had a lot of wet spring, and like my nephew said, it's kind of like the Oregon of old because it's been really wet. Usually it rains a lot in May, but we've been spoiled the last few years with
wow.
sunnier weather.
I had no idea that you had been having so much rain out there in Oregon. Well,
Yeah.
for everybody who doesn't know, you grew up in a
Mhm,
family
mhm,
business that
mhm,
specializes in this Iris Germanica or tall bearded iris and
mhm.
all this wonderful collection of blooms. Um, Shriner's Nursery. Did I pronounce? No, it's Shriner's Iris Farm. That's what it
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
It, either works.
Okay, well, I just wanted to make sure, yeah, everybody kind of knew what we were talking about. So, Liz, how did you? I mean, we know, I think we all can figure out how you got into this business, but
Yeah,
it's such an unusual thing to be able to sit down and chat with someone with with generations, literally, all in
yeah.
this within the same business. So, I'd love to hear more about how the Shriners began and
Mhm.
where they are now.
Well, yes. So I'm third generation owner of Shriners, but my grandfather, FX Shriner, back in the early 1900s, he was dabbling. He actually kind of did poultry. He kind of
Really?
crossed poultry chickens, and he raised chickens and did a little different things there. And he had a chance encounter on a train because he was a purchaser for a department store with John C. Wister, who was involved in the Iris Society, and they talked about Iris, and he became smitten with them, started growing them, started hybridizing them, and 5 years later, after that chance encounter with him, he printed his own list in 1925, Shriner's Iris Gardens in St. Paul, Minnesota. So, and that was the start of it. He passed away in 1931, but before he did, his
Wow.
his his sons, well, his son Robert, his daughter Connie, and then my dad Gus Bernard, they he said this would be a great business to get into for you because I can see potential in this. So Robert, who was older, he kind of dabbled in it and helped at the farm, and my aunt did too, and my dad went off to war, and they started doing the business in Minnesota, but Minnesota, the winter's so cold and the freeze thaw effect. So they would create crosses and hybridizations, but a lot of times they didn't take, or they didn't see the results of their crosses. They didn't see the fruits of their labor for so long. And so they Robert, my uncle Bob, I should say, he started writing different universities and saying, where's a place where we can grow these iris and not have such a, this weather to deal with, because that freeze thaw affected, Minnesota winters so cold, that it was freezing out a lot of them. So they wrote to like University of Tennessee. Uh, 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 they looked at a valley actually in Texas, and
Wow.
Oregon, the Willamette Valley. So, and they also sent iris down to Medford, Oregon. They had people who they sent iris to see how they did for a while and see what the production was. Well, the Willamette Valley won. So thankfully, I'm glad. No, I like living here.
Not bad.
but but so the Willamette Valley won, and in 1946 they started raising iris here, and they came out on the train. They brought everything with them, back in like probably in 40, in the before that, probably 45, 44. They came out on the train, and even it's funny, some of the Adirondack benches that we have for our bloom season, it's that original pattern. They brought those out on the train,
Oh my
those
goodness.
benches. I mean, I guess it's different than from today. When you leave somewhere, you bring everything with you like that. I mean, even your benches, because it's not as easy to get them back then as it is now. You can't,
Right.
there was no Home Depot. So so that, they brought everything out, and then it was a peach orchard, so they started clearing the orchard, of course, and doing a lot of work, and then they started with very small acreage. They moved into this office that we have now. In this office, I remember my mom saying when she pulled up, because her and my dad, they got married in 1944. When she came here to live after the war, she said she grew up in St. Paul, and kind of a nicer section of St. Paul, and it's a city girl, and she said there was chickens in the front yard, and and it was kind of looked a little bit hillbillyish, but they all lived in that office. Robert's family, Connie, and my grandma, my dad, and they lived there until, like, oh gosh, I think four of my siblings lived here. And then they finally started building their own houses because the business was doing a little bit better, and they were getting the name out. But it started really just from just from them just working hard. I mean, in a way, that's one of the things I really feel strongly about. They created what we are doing today. They put us where we are. I mean, I have easy street, Scott, compared to them. They worked so hard. I mean,
Wow.
they had so little, but yet they created this business for us that we are, and we're working hard to keep it going. We have different struggles than they did,
Sure.
but they were, physically, they had so much work to do. And but so that's kind of the way backstory. Then fast forward, okay, so then my brothers and my brother Steve, actually, so back up a little bit. So then my dad and Connie and Gus ran the business. They were the second generation after my grandpa, and they ran the business. My dad did production. Robert, did the catalog layout and took pictures. And then my aunt worked in the office. So there was all of that going on. And then they started winning awards with the American Irish Society. My dad, they won their first award for Blue Sapphire. It's a 1957 or 58. Blue Sapphire was, and that's the Dykes Medal Award is one of the highest awards you can give an iris nationally. So that was pretty, that was a little sweetener for them. And then they went on to win like 11 more through the years after that. And
Wow.
most of them were all my dad's crosses. And now I'm starting, and so, okay, most of them are my dad's crosses, but what happened is then my brother Ray got into the business, and then my brother Steve, and my cousin Dave, and my cousin-in-law Tom, and my cousin Ellen. They all were working in the business also. And Dave kind of took over his dad's spot doing the catalog. My brother Ray took over production. Steve was in charge of retail and also pictures. He loves to take photos. And Tom was more the controller. And then I came into the business late. I had worked, but when you grow up here, though, I mean, I came into the business as an adult back in 1990, and I haven't left. But when you grow up here, I mean, you work every summer here, so it's not like you really join the business to be an owner and carry it on. But at first, Scott, let me tell you, when I was in high school and working here 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, I'm like, people would say, do you want to run your family business? And I'd be like, forget it. Are you kidding me? I'm getting as far away as I can. No.
The funny thing is, I have heard that with multi-generational farmers on the podcast before, and I say this a lot, where it's kind of like the mafia. Once you're in, you can never get out. So
That's right.
it just pulls. Well, I don't know. There's something grounding about it, I think. But anyway, but this is your
You're
story. I want to hear.
you're right. You're right. So yeah, that's exactly right, because I came back, and it's funny because I worked for the court system, and that really started to wear on me. And I thought, I like flowers. I want to go back to flowers. They're so much happier. It's so much more. And the customers, everybody you talk to is happy, because most gardeners, I mean, that's the only time they're unhappy is if their flowers aren't blooming or something's going on. But it's just such a different group of people. And it's what I grew up with, because
Right.
when we were younger, we used to, run outside of our house and went during bloom time, and we'd take the catalogs that we had, and we'd sell them for, I don't know what, 50 cents, then $1. And then we'd do it like our mom and dad said, you could do it for a while. We do it for, until we got tired of it. Of course, Scott, what we thought it was hours, it was probably only 15 minutes. Then we'd run back in the house. But so, it's really nice to come back to the business, and it's really nice to see that it is growing. And now my nephew is also, he joined the business about 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And it's so nice to have a younger generation, because he's just taken it to also new heights, because my brother Steve and my brother Ray, let me back up a little bit. So Dave and Tom retired in 2011. So then it was just my brother Ray, Steve, and I running the business. And we're doing good, but it's a big business. There's lots going on. And so sometimes you kind of keep doing things the same way as a business owner, right?
Right.
And when you get tired, you need some new ideas, and we'd have some, but getting those ideas through sometimes is difficult. So having a new, younger generation family member is awesome, because they have all these ideas, and then they're also technically savvy, and that they know exactly how to get it done and how to make it work. So Ben has been just a godsend to us all. It's kind of given us new life. And he's helped our production, and that's what he's mostly in charge of, production, but also a lot of great marketing ideas. It's been really good. So yeah, here we are, fourth generation. This is our 97th year.
Wow.
we're excited, you know, we're already talking about what do we want to do for the 100th year because that's quite an event, right?
Yeah.
So something more than just cake, you know. I'm not we have to figure this out. Anyway, but so we're excited about that. And yeah, it's come a long way, but as I said, if it weren't for that first generation and all their hard work, I I mean, starting a business today is hard. I mean, it's especially in the older days, you know, clearing the land, doing everything they did. They just worked long, hard hours, you know, and I didn't see that as much as a kid. I was just so lucky to be able to play, you know, and run around in 400 acres and just, you know, just enjoy life and sleep outside and not worry about anything going on or having to worry as kids do these days sometimes. But
Sure.
so I've had a pretty idyllic life growing up. And I think that's kind of why too I wanted to come back.
Right. No,
So
I mean, that makes perfect sense. Well,
yeah,
I was thinking, I mean, first of all, it's hard enough sometimes to like find the piece of property and start a farm from
right.
scratch, much less move halfway across the country
Oh
and
yeah,
then start from scratch, and it's and you have downtime because you don't have the production to kind of sell plants or whatever, and
right.
and it can take a year or two to kind of really get everything up and going where there's cash flow and stuff. So
Exactly.
I can
Exactly.
imagine it was the
And
challenges.
and you think about it, you know, when they would hybridize, because that's what they always wanted to introduce their own hybridizations. So, hey, I have something I can show you. So do you see that?
Sure. The
That's the
ir
first,
an
that's the
Iris Lovers
first list.
catalog. Oh
Yeah,
my goodness.
I'll send you a picture of it. But that is the first list. I mean, it's like, whoa, it's
That's
and
a piece of history there.
it is anyway. But if we think about it, when they hybridize, it takes 10 years really to see the cross.
That's what I was wondering. Like when you make a cross of a bearded iris, it takes 10 years? Well,
Well, about 8 years, you know, or 10 years before it gets into production for sure.
okay,
So
yeah.
it's probably about 6 to 8 years. You know, you'll get a few plants, you know, sister seedlings, and you'll look at them all, but you can't sell them then because you don't have that many. So what you're going to do is you're looking at them and then you rate them. Are they worthy enough to introduce? Are they worthy enough to keep? So then you have to, you know, decide and then grow them again in next season. And that's why they had to move from Minnesota, because so they'd make these crosses, they'd see a great iris, and then all of a sudden they'd save it. And then the next year they'd go look for it and
Half
it
gone
was
or
gone.
yeah.
You know, or something happened. So that's why Oregon was such a boon to them to move to. So then yeah, then that's something they started doing their hybridizations way back when. And as I said, they started getting awards for their hybrids. And yeah, and they all really were so passionate about it back then. And I think we are too, because we want to keep the legacy alive, because we realize, all of us, I mean, one of my brothers is talking about retiring, and we realize what's more important to us than anything is keeping this business alive and ready to for Ben to take it over without any problems, right? We want it to flow, we want it to grow. And so, you know, that's where that's so important to us. And we feel very strongly about that. So, but
Mm,
don't worry, I'm not going anywhere for a long
good.
time.
Well, a couple questions. So, how big is the actual farm? Is it? Did you say 400 acres? Is it
we have
all?
we have about 440 acres, and we rotate. So right now we're growing about 128 acres in iris, and then we rotate with other farmers, you know. So because we plant on every third year, the iris go into that field. Like this year I was so excited because our field is right across from the office, and it's only there every 3 years. And it's going to be beautiful, beautiful,
Oh my
but
goodness.
it's waiting to bloom, right? So because the backdrop of it is we have this about a 6, 7 acre plot of Douglas fir trees.
Oh, wow.
So that it's a marketing dream, right? There's the field, there's the trees, it's gorgeous. So but that's every third year. And then, yes, we have about 440 acres and we rotate with another farmer. And we also have, daylilies, which we have like about 5 to 7 acres now that we grow. And we used to do daylilies way back in the 60s, and we even printed a catalog for them. But we got in the 90s, we kind of, in the, about, no, the late 70s, early 80s, we got out of growing daylilies for production. We grew them just for us, for fun. But now we're back into it again, and they're Bill Marriott's hybrids, and they're gorgeous, really, really pretty.
Wow.
So those are fun because they bloom in June. I'm going to just show you. I think you've seen one of them. Isn't that gorgeous?
That is gorgeous.
He hybridizes them, and then he ships them to us every year in the fall, and then we plant them out for production. So,
Amazing.
yeah.
Well, I want to kind of put the cart before the horse, and I want to talk about iris production because I feel like this is one of those cut flowers that has been in the garden for a long time, has come out as a cut flower more, maybe I'm gonna guess like maybe the last 8 years I've seen
Mhm.
more cut iris, bearded
Right.
iris. And so I want to talk about the cut side of it before we talk about the growing side of it.
Sure.
And so I know that I found out recently through one of your employees that some of the iris that I used to get cut came through somebody else, but they were yours, which doesn't surprise me. And so my thing is, and I'm really excited because next week I'm going to have some, but hopefully if the weather warms up. But
Yeah.
as far as cut, when somebody gets or buys some cut bearded iris, what can they do to really lengthen the lifespan of that? Because I feel like sometimes people are scared because it's an unknown. They don't know.
Right. It is. And yeah, so what we suggest for people to do, and people are out here this weekend buying cut stems for their mothers, and we tell them, recut them in the vase and give them space in your vase. I mean, don't just cram them in, give them space in the vase to bloom so they don't crowd each other out. And also every couple days, probably every maybe 2, 3 days, I would probably the third day, I would maybe recut them if you wanted to, recut the stem. And I would also pick off the spent ones. One thing we try to do as hybridizers, it's very important for us, and we feel strongly about it. We want to have as many blooms on that stem as we can. We won't even look at an iris anymore unless it has 7 to 9 buds.
Really?
We like 7 to 9 buds. And some years that doesn't happen, probably because of the cold we've had, but generally we like to have a lot of blooms on one stem. So therefore, you just simply, and I wish I could show you an example, but you just simply pick off the spent bloom, and then the new bud comes and blooms. And you can have iris in a vase probably up to about 7 to 10 days. Make sure you don't put it in direct sunlight. Make sure it's not in a real warm place. A cooler place would be good to have your bouquet if you could. Those are some tricks we have. We don't really recommend, you don't need to put anything in the water. We don't really recommend that, or you can if you want to, but we don't feel that's
Not a have to.
necessary.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
So
it's so funny. I'm so glad you said that because I will never forget. Like I want to say it was the second year that we had cut iris that I was so sad because it was this, I forget what color it was. It was the most amazing color at the time. And that first bloom on the very top had faded. And I'm like, I just can't throw this away because it just doesn't feel bad. And so I literally broke that top flower out and it just snaps right out.
right, snaps right out.
And the thing is if you, and this was me, and you might have a tip on this, but if you don't snap that out, sometimes you don't even see the bud that's just waiting
Below.
there to open up. And it's
Exactly.
like there is more buds on that stem than that one or two flowers that are sitting there. And you can get so much more life out of these flowers than I ever imagined. And when I learned that little trick, I was like,
Yeah.
okay, this revolutionized this flower for me for sure.
I think you're so right. People are just kind of afraid to touch things like that. They're afraid they're going to ruin it. You're
Right.
not ruining it. It's a plant. It's fine. It's going to be fine. Snap that bud off, and then here comes the new one, right? The other reason why you snap the buds off, you should, especially if you get dark purple ones, they can drip. And we've had several people call us and say, "Oh, it dyed my beautiful tablecloth, or it died. What can I do to get it out?" Or I'm like, I don't know, because it's that dye, and those dark purple or black irises are so intense. It is really hard to get out. So that's another thing. Do it because if you wherever you have them, you want to protect what's below. So yeah,
That's a great point.
yeah, yeah. I
I-
always say we should take those dyes, and I love to knit, and I say somebody should use those dyes and create a color, but I haven't been able to do it, Scott, in my free time yet. So one of these days, I've got lots of dye. I just need to give it to somebody.
I love it. That's a great idea. Well, and that's a good tip because I didn't know that. I know other flowers that do that, but I didn't know that iris did that. So,
Yeah.
I
Not
guess I'm
and
so busy popping those dead flowers off, so I can get to the next ones. I never even think about that. So,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
wow.
But they, and some people, that's what they say. They go, "Oh, iris don't last very long," but you know what? They are the queens of the garden, and you don't be busy when you get a bouquet in and it's in your house or it's on your porch, or pour yourself a cup of coffee, or pour yourself a cup of tea, a glass of wine, and just sit and enjoy it and look at it. And because the colors, they're luminous a lot of times, and they
Yes.
change. And some of the blends, I love it. We have some blended iris now that come out, and they might be kind of they look in the bud like they're almost a pink, a real, and then they open and they're more of they're kind of got tones of brown and copper, and there's just a lot going on, and they're so beautiful. And so
Yes.
I think that's one thing I like to tell people is take time to look at the flowers and stop and really look at them, and enjoy them, because it just goes by so fast. Yes, it does. And that's one of the things that it just rests your soul and rests your mind to look at them,
I
to
agree.
enjoy them. Hmm.
Well, and I know too, a lot of times as a designer, when you're putting together palettes of flowers and colors and things like that, when you see something like some of these iris that and their color combinations, you're like, I would never in a million years think to put this color with this color, put
Right.
this purple with this bronzy gold color or whatever. And it's like, but here it is in a stem, and you're like, it is incredible. And it's like,
Incredible.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like inspiring, I think, of thinking of
Yeah.
new color combinations and things. I just That's just really amazes me. So let me ask this question. Now, a lot of times these stems are so long and
Hmm.
they have like a break or a branch down
Hmm.
maybe 10 inches down.
Hmm.
Like, is it a big deal? And this is probably a silly question, but like if you were to cut the top out of it and take one long stem and make it two short stems,
That's fine.
yeah, you can
You
do that, right?
you can do that. You can do whatever you want. You're the designer.
Right.
You can do whatever you
Well,
want. Yeah, it still looks beautiful. It's not going to hurt the iris at all.
I wasn't sure if the lower blooms just took longer to open because they're lower on the stem, as the
Yeah.
top ones usually are the first to open, right?
Right, right. Yeah, no,
Okay.
you could do that. That's perfectly fine. And that's one thing, when I get a bouquet, I'm always kind of redoing it and moving it around, because yes, sometimes the ones, if I cram the vase too much, which I sometimes tend to do because I can get a lot of them, right, Scott?
Just
So
walk out your office.
that's right. So sometimes I have to remove some from the side because they're getting a little crowded, and and yeah, and then you just recut, kind of refix it. It's kind of like anything. You're kind of adjusting it, making it look good for the next few days. So, but yeah,
Well,
recutting it is fine.
I love that. Well, okay, so when it comes to growing this
Hmm.
queen of the garden, as you put it, I love. Uh, do you? When is the best time, I guess, to really plant? I think fall, but you may have a different idea. Maybe it depends on where you live. To
Yeah,
start them.
it does. I think the fall is the best time usually because you want to go through your bloom season, and then usually we say about a month after bloom is when you should dig them up and divide them. And then, digging up and dividing them. And we have all this on our website too, if anybody ever needs help. We have a
Okay.
lot of good visuals on there. But dig them up and divide them. Keep the larger rhizome and trim the leaves. Cut away any diseased or spent leaves, and then I would say the fall. But the one thing that I think is important too is when you divide and when you want to start planting in the fall, check your soil, because I feel a lot of people say, "Oh, my iris didn't bloom," they didn't look as good. One of the things that I think is the biggest thing, besides full sun, you need full sun or 6 to 8 hours, 6 hours sunlight at least, is soil. Soil is very important, and amending your soil, making sure that if you have had things in there for 3 to 4 years, really to amend your soil, even like every 2 3 years, I always top dress my soil at home. And by doing that, my soil is so nice as far as digging, dividing. It's just and the plants love it. You put them in there and they take off. So if you're having trouble and you feel like they're just not growing after you plant, because usually after you plant them, after you dig and divide them and you replant, you'll see them go growth. You'll see them start to grow, and I just think it cannot be stressed enough that you really need to amend your soil.
Yeah. Well, and I think, thanks for sharing that, because I think sometimes I know one of the things I did one year, somebody had given me a bunch of rhizomes and I went to plant them and I planted them too deep.
Mm.
And they do not like that. So what's the ideal depth for planting these rhizomes?
Well, yeah, I would say it. Now it's kind of interesting because when you plant them, you want to plant them so yeah, they're sitting more on the surface a little bit. However, if you plant them like if you lived in Montana, or
Oh, right.
the Dakotas or something like that, we always recommend that people in the northern states try to get your iris by July, because that way they have some good grow time to get those roots established, because iris roots can be probably like 10 to 12, like a foot long. They can be very long. So get them in early, and then we recommend, so you can have kind of plant them shallowly. Sometimes what we say is the tops of the rhizome, it likes to be baked by the sun. It kind of,
Mm,
if it's sticking out a little bit, not all of it, but if it's sticking out, they tend to push themselves up if you have iris in your garden. And you'll notice that that's kind of their culture. They push themselves up, and that rhizome likes to be seen a little bit. However, if you live like in the northern states, you're going to need to do winter protection, like pine boughs or leaves that aren't not oak leaves, but certain leaves that you can use, straw that's weed free seed straw, to cover them and just protect them from the cold. So yeah, but
mm.
that's that I would say you can. Some people who live in really hot climates wait to dig and divide them right till like maybe November, but they can get
Mm,
away with that in the southern part of the US,
sure. Because they
where
still have
and
some time to grow before the ground, like ground doesn't freeze as often or as
right,
deep as it does up north. So yeah, that
right.
makes perfect sense.
Right. In Oregon
Wow.
here, we are very lucky because we can sneak things in later, and they still do really well. But don't do what we do. No.
Well, that's the one thing about gardening is you have to read these instructions and take into
No,
account where you are in the country.
where you live.
And I appreciate you sharing all of that because it
Yeah.
does make a difference. It makes a big difference.
It makes a huge difference. And I'll point this out too. Maybe this isn't available for everyone, but I know Google, of course, is everyone's way of finding out everything. But the other resource is your ag department. Your ag department's there. You're paying for them, whether you know it or not, and they are more than willing to help you. What is your growing climate? What is your growing climate, soil? They have a lot of resources that can help the gardener in certain states. And some people who are having trouble, I always recommend that to them.
Sure. Well, and I think too, so what you're referring to, because I actually interned for them when I was in college, is like
Oh,
your local county extension agent.
correct.
And a lot of times they have data for soil temperatures and when, like, average, freeze dates and all that kind of stuff. That's really helpful. So I'm glad you brought that up. I think
Hmm.
about peonies, and I think when you plant peony roots and you get them in the ground, they say you really can't get a good, or you shouldn't harvest them for at least 3 years. So that energy kind of goes back into the plant.
Hmm.
When you're growing iris for our flower farmers that are for cut production, is there a rule of thumb for like maybe you don't cut the first year's blooms, or I don't know, is there any kind of rule of thumb?
No, you can cut the first year's bloom. Unfortunately, the first year you don't have as many stems,
Okay.
but certainly you can cut them. Usually 3 to 4 years, we dig up our display garden to ensure beautiful blooms, right? So if I was a cut flower grower, if I wanted to do it for your own cut flowers, to for your vase and to sell, I would probably say every 3 to 4 years you would need to, especially maybe have certain areas where, okay, this year I'm going to dig up this section and replant, and then I'm going to dig up this section. So you'll always have plenty of flowers, plenty of iris blooming, because usually, like I said, the first year blooms, there aren't quite as many stems. Second year, there's more, and third year, there's always plentiful, and fourth year too. But after about the fourth year, then it's really good to dig up your iris and divide them. And that's when I recommend, if you don't amend your soil often, do it every 4 years when you dig and divide them. And then you'll make sure you ensure to get those good blooms that you want for your cut stems. And for cutting stems, what do we recommend? We recommend cutting them in the morning, and depending on what they want, whether they want them partially open or whether they want them in tight bud. Um, that's up to them, but that's a good thing to do, I think, for cut flower culture.
Sure. Well, and I love that idea too of sort of rotating that revitalization process so that way you don't ever have to take one huge hit at a time and you can
Right,
always you always have, flowers to cut from year to year. I think that's smart.
right, yeah, because otherwise you'll be really shy the first year. So,
Yeah.
mhm.
And then when you go to cut, like if you cut a tight bud stage, how many days does it usually take for that bloom to open?
Tight bud stage. Well, it depends. I would say
Like if it's colored up a
if
little
it's
bit,
colored
but
up a little
not,
bit,
yeah,
probably maybe 3 to 4 days. If it's really tight bud like that.
yeah.
Um, Yeah, I think 3 to 4 days. It seems like, like right now, it just seems like I've seen a lot of them in bud, and they just seem to be sitting there, kinda like I planted, sugar snap peas, and I swear they're still 2 inches tall. I'm like, "They should be a lot bigger than they," but it's just one of those years,
Oh,
you know? It's what
yeah,
being a farmer
yeah,
is.
yeah. Well, okay, so what um your business is primarily um a a rhizome selling business, right? You're really after selling plants.
Mhm,
That's what you're known for. And the
mm,
cut flower production is just sort of an extra. And then the garden tour part of it is also a fun extra.
Right. Right.
Is that like what percentage of your business is actually selling plants?
Oh, that's the largest percent of our business.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the mainstay of our business is selling iris, daylilies, iris being in the lead, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and then the cut flowers we started doing, well, we've always cut them for people on site, but then we really started shipping them out. That was probably maybe 20 years ago we started doing that. And that's a good business too. A lot of wholesalers like that. A lot of stores now, like New Seasons and different. We have some markets around us who like to have the cut flower delivery, and then the bloom season. We've always had our garden open for visitors. I mean, since I was a little kid, I mean, anybody could come by and they could walk through, and then you know of course 2020 came and we couldn't have anybody because the state kind of dropped that down, and so that was really too bad because of COVID. But now we're kind of back, and because we're a 97-year-old business, Scott, we now our garden is open. It's a 10-acre display. It's beautiful, but we have to charge. So we charge people $5 to go through the garden, and largely that's just for the upkeep of the garden because it's
Yeah.
a lot of work. I mean, if you've ever seen it, it's gorgeous out there. And my brother Ray is the one who designed it, and he loves plants and flowers. He's just an addict. If nurseries see him coming, they go out for lunch because they know they can afford it. No. But so he's designed it so that it's like a crush of spring. So when the iris are blooming, the delphiniums, the oh gosh, the peonies, everything, it's an explosion of color. There's there's just so many different companion plants blooming at the same time that it's really beautiful. So that takes a lot of work, right? So
Uh,
we now charge, but it's most people are that's just it's beautiful. It's so well worth it to go in and view it, and you can spend a long time here. I mean, it's a big display, and some people just spend the day. They bring a picnic lunch. They just spend the whole day here, and that's fine by us. We even let them stay till sunset, if they want to. So but not many people are
Amazing.
out there sitting at picnic tables today, though.
I bet.
But
I
yeah,
bet.
that's really that's always been a part of our business. But and then we open it up when we have our bloom season open house. We are out there. We're taking orders from people. We have a small gift shop, and we sell things for people, and we answer questions and talk to them about the business and the history. And people really like it. They like to be able to talk to, like, myself or somebody, my nephew, my brother, and just learn about it a little bit too. We have a lot of history boards out there, and so you're just going to have to come out.
I'm going to. And believe me, it's on my bucket list, I
That's
promise.
great.
I love that. Well, one of the things I was wondering too is when growing, whether you're growing for your garden or commercially as a cut flower, what sort of pests and diseases do people need to kind of keep their eye open for, and kind of how do you address that?
Well, one of the things, especially here in Oregon, we have a leaf spot fungus from excessive wet weather. So I'm sure the calls, Leslie is going to be taking a lot of calls regarding that. That is something that we recommend, a fungicide and a leaf spot fungicide. There's so many different ones on the market. I'm not going to suggest one,
Sure.
but you spray about every couple weeks for that. Another thing to do is we're trying to hybridize for so that some varieties seem more susceptible to that. So some of those we might slowly try to we're trying to breed for disease resistance, right?
Right.
So some of those varieties, if we really notice that that's prevalent, we might all of a sudden it won't be in our catalog anymore. It won't be part of our stock. So that's another thing. But if you have leaf spot fungus, we recommend cutting back the leaf as far as you see the spots, and then spraying, and just keeping on it, because those spores fall into the soil, and then when it rains, then they jump up on your leaves, and so just maintaining a clean bed around your iris is really good. The other thing is watch for slugs. Slugs here, they just love to munch on everything. Iris, they don't seem to in my garden as much because they love, I swear, they love my hostas more. So they're just eating
Well,
them alive.
sometimes that's a good way. It's just plant something they like better.
Yeah,
That's a good way to
that's
for
right.
pest control.
That's
Yeah.
right. So yeah, but putting out little slug traps, and other ways you can do it with, dog friendly, of course, because I have two dogs.
Yeah.
And the other diseases, I would say, those are the two main ones we have. Um,
Sure.
there's other ones, but not that it's, iris are drought tolerant, so they're pretty good that way. They don't need a lot of water in the summer. Maybe it depends on where you live, maybe once a week, but not, they don't need excessive water. Um, and I think maintaining a healthy, clean area too, and just watching for it. But they don't get that many pests and disease. Now, sometimes people say, "Oh, but aphids," but aphids usually don't come to iris until, like, we notice sometimes we get aphids like when we harvest and we trim them, and then the aphids somehow, when you trim the iris and they're set aside for replant, then the aphids want to come because they must, there's something in the air that they either smell, or and they all go, oh, those iris have been cut and let's go see them. But they aren't generally on the iris per
That's good to
se.
know.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I did not know, and maybe I just don't fully understand what I saw. I didn't know. I was looking through a catalog one time, and I noticed there was several varieties that were being grown for fall reblooming or fall blooming.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
is that just a reblooming situation, or is that a fall blooming
That's
situation?
a reblooming iris, and we have several of those, and you can search that on our website, reblooming iris. And we love those because then all of a sudden in August, usually early August, late August, you all of a sudden you'll have this another bloom, right? It's and it's beautiful because like I said, sometimes of course you want it to bloom longer. We're not roses, but we'd love to have longer bloom.
Right.
So for rebloom to happen, we always recommend, okay, after the first bloom, the spring bloom, then we recommend a month after to fertilize your iris for rebloom. And they're beautiful. So we grow a lot of them, and we want to continue to grow more of them. Sometimes we'll see them even in November, they're out there blooming. So we get so excited. We had one, I think it was, I can't remember which one it was, but December 1st, went out. We all had to take a field trip out in the garden because there was one blooming. So yeah, it's beautiful. And they're easy. It's not too much care. All of a sudden, just realize that that's going to happen. There's some beautiful colors. They're getting a lot more of them. The hybridizers are hybridizing a lot more to get rebloom, which is great.
So that's a genetic trait. That's just not a
Correct.
cultural situation
Hmm.
where,
It
okay.
it is. It's a genetic trait. Yeah.
Well,
The
the thing
the
that I thought,
I have
go
to
ahead.
show you. Sorry. So this one, you
Yeah.
see it? That
Yeah.
is a rebloomer. So that's really cool
Wow.
because that is a unique color too. And I think
Yeah.
I
It's a
think
rich purple.
yeah, and I think rebloomers, they need to the colors. They tend to be blues, purples, yellows, of course, whites, but we need to really branch out more in the reblooming color spectrum, and they're doing that. So
The thing I thought was so interesting was so many of the ones I saw look like they would be perfect for the fall garden.
mhm,
I like those rich velvety tones and
right,
fall kind of, apricot or rust colors and things.
right, mhm.
I don't, and I, who knows what I was looking at, but all I know is I thought, wow, I need more of, okay, so if I wasn't already in love with this flower, I'm now in love with this flower even more because I mean, how awesome is it to have this late blooming surprise in your garden?
Hmm.
Or if you're doing cup production, to have a second crop.
Right. Right.
What a awesome possibility. Now, typically with the reblooming varieties, do they bloom as many stems as they do the first wave, or is it like
Typically,
half?
typically, yes, you're right. And I was going to mention that typically the bloom isn't as robust and vigorous as the spring bloom. But it's a rebloom. And so you might not get as many stems. You might not now, but certain varieties, that's not the case. They're just like Sugar Blues is one of them. It just blooms its little head off, and so does Rosalie Figgy. I mean, there's a lot of stems and a lot of blooms. Cantina is another one that I can think of, and those are tried and true varieties. But typically, yes, they're not. And the other thing we have to remember is remontancy, it's called reblooming,
Yes.
is not
Mhm.
always going to happen depending on where you live. Like some places, it's just like probably further north. I don't know if you're going to get rebloom.
You
It's
have to have a long enough season.
Yeah. So you may not get rebloom. You can sure try, but you might not. So
Right.
it's not just because it says rebloomer doesn't mean it's always going to rebloom for you. And some people have told me, well, gosh, it seems to take a couple years before they get established. That's another thing. It might take 2 years for them to establish themselves before they rebloom. So,
Good point. That's a really good point. Well, and I'm glad to know that too, because I know with hydrangeas, which I'm a big fan of,
oh, I love them.
um,
Yeah.
there's all the remittent varieties that are now coming out to market, and I know the reblooming there again isn't as full, and it definitely you have to have the longer season where you are in order to get it. So,
Hmm.
I'm glad you brought that up. You know, it's interesting because I rarely have the opportunity I always end the podcast with my advice question, and it's rare that I have the opportunity to ask this question of someone that has multi generations worth of farming family history, and have been through, I mean, wars and moving states and pandemics.
Right, right. Pandemic. Yeah, that we can add that to the history.
Yeah, and so we have a lot of farmers out there, some gardeners, some flat florists that also garden. And I'm just thinking, what is a piece of advice that, from, just your perspective, you would want to pass on to our listener?
Well, I think one thing is have fun. Have fun what you're doing. I mean, yes, everything's hard work, and you have to get you're providing for your family, or you're starting a business, or you're just have fun with it, because you're doing this because it's your passion, right? You're doing this because you love it. And I mean, we work, in the summer 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. It's very intense, but we
Sure.
all have this goal in mind of what we want. And as a family, I should say, my brothers and my nephew and I, we always have fun. We get together, once a week and meet, for meetings, and we always joke and laugh, and we have fun too, because we know that you this is our life, and we love it. It's great. But I would say that's one thing: make sure you have fun in what you do, and don't let it be so onerous on you that you forget the beauty and the joy in what you're doing. And I think the other thing is, gardening is, trial and error, trial and error. You'll do something and you'll think, that didn't work. Well, you just start over, start again, because isn't that it's kind of like cooking. You make a recipe and it bombs.
Yeah.
You do it again. You don't say throw in the towel and say that's it. Farming is like that, because every year, and I think that's why I like farming so much. Every year is different. You never know what to throw at you. And that's our the thing we're always kind of surprised at. And it used to be you kind of had an idea, right? You always kind of had what was coming down the pike. and everything. I don't, weather's a little bit different. And so that's another thing I would say, just, you know, don't be surprised and just take it, learn to take it, be flexible, because learn to bend a little, because you're going to have to. So,
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you. I know something I want to bring out that we were before we started recording, we were talking and we're just talking about, the kinds of things we wanted to discuss in
mhm,
this interview.
mhm,
And you mentioned that being a family business, you guys communicate all the time about everything.
we do.
A-
Hmm.
And I feel like it's tricky to work with your family
Hmm.
sometimes.
Hmm.
Even
Hmm.
though you've been doing it forever, it's still
Right,
tricky. And I
right.
think that is a testament to um what you guys do, because I just feel
Hmm.
like sometimes that can be a challenge. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that particular, you know, dynamic or not, but I know not everyone
Well,
has that opportunity, but
I really do. I first off, I just want to thank my parents, because we have, I have 7 siblings, and I think we all get along very well. And I think my parents were really instrumental in that, right? So that we're very fortunate in that way. But if you're in a business together, respect each other's what they have to say. There's times, yes, we have flare-ups. There's times I'll take my brother by the shirt and say, what are you,
uh-huh.
but we usually end up laughing, together too. But there's times, yeah, you get a little frustrated with each other, but you realize you're in it for the same reason. I mean,
Yeah,
sometimes you don't hold things too tightly, because you're in it for the same reason. You all want the same goal. Sometimes um, you just have to let go a little bit, and realize, that's the way to make things work together. And we all want the same thing. And this year it's interesting for me. We've hired a lot of new younger people in our office, and they're awesome. They're great, but I have to kind of let go a little bit, because I'm kind of a worker bee, and I like to get things done. And so it's kind of hard for me to give some of that up, but in giving it up, you give them room to grow, and it's much better place, because
sure.
more better ideas, better flow, happy people, right? You want all that, so I think that's the same with our family. And we get together, for lunches and stuff, and we always have fun. The other thing we always did too as a family, I think, we'd talk business, but we always talk other things too, like, what about this? Or did you, we don't just focus on the business when we get together. We talk about our personal, lives, and what's our latest thing we're doing. So that's fun too, because we really do down deep really love each other, and we love being with each other, even though sometimes it can be work. But I am really happy I got to come back to the business, because there's nothing. My brothers are were really fun to work with. I love working with them, even in the tense times, and they're all very, it's been great. And my nephew, I love working with him. We have a great communication. We That's the other thing. Communicate, communicate, communicate. If something's on your chest and you feel like, gosh, I just don't know about that, communicate that. Say, gosh, this, because if you hold it in, it just festers, and you need to get it out and say, why is this happening? Or should we do this? Try to say it. Don't say it with just, I think that's really, really important. Communication. So,
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you sharing that, and I was glad that you mentioned it at the beginning, because I'm like, that's not a small feat, and it's great that everyone understands. We're all on the same page. We're all in it together. We all love each other, and we're in it for the vision of this company that's someday going to even be bigger than it is today. And it's
yeah,
just
yeah.
amazing. It's amazing. Well, Liz,
Yeah,
thank you
that's right.
so much for being on the Flower
Thank you.
Podcast.
Yeah, I loved it, Scott. Thank you so much. Thank you. I really enjoyed it.